How?
Can
How
you
are
hear me
you?
well? How are you?
I'm fine. I mean, considering the time we are living, I'm really fine.
That's good. Yeah. So I was just saying, Renzo, that we have this really incredible opportunity because my scores of your wines, including the newest release of Tignanello, are going to go live on our website as I'm talking to you. So
I'm curious.
I'm curious to see your reaction. So as soon as I see them on the site, then I'm going to tell you what they are, and then you can tell me what you think of my work, of my reviews of your wines.
Depends on the score. If the score is
Yeah,
good,
I'm sure.
very well.
So listen, so what we're going to do is I wanted to talk with you to kind of get a little bit of an idea of a little bit of context about the beautiful wines made at Marchesi Antinori, a little bit of the story, a little bit of the idea of your philosophy of winemaking approach. I also kind of want to touch a little bit on the subject of super Tuscans, because it's kind of the theme that I've been using to connect a lot of these Instagram live appointments that I've been doing recently. So we'll have a little chance to talk about that. But first of all, I just wanted to ask you, how is it going so far? How is the 2020 vintage looking so far? What's going on in the vineyards right now?
No, it is, of course, it's difficult to say how the vintage will be because it's really very early. What we can say that we had a regular bad break. We had just a little bit of cold, but not really, we didn't have any damage practically. Of course, there are some variability in terms of yield in different vineyards, in different varieties. Sangiovese seems to be regular, not too high, I must say, less than last year.
Right.
Then it depends also on the training system. In the cordon, we have less production. In the canes, pruned vines a little bit better because the buds are more fertile. But I think now we expect to have some rain because as a season has been very dry.
It's been
so
dry.
we had a lot of rain in October and November, especially November. But then after middle of December, practically we didn't have so much rain. A little bit more in the northern part of Italy, of course, but central Italy and southern Italy, not so much. So we expect to have some rain probably tonight, but that could be beneficial. As you know, most of our vineyards in Italy, they don't have the irrigation. And so have some rain directly from the clouds is not negative. Quite regular, maybe, not maybe, for sure in advance. If we compare with last year, if you remember last year, we had May that was very complicated, rainy May and also cool weather. This year, it was not raining and the weather was much better. And so we are maybe 10 days in advance versus last year, but probably just 3 or 4 days if we consider 18 or 17 vintage.
Right. Before I go on, so Renzo, I see that you have your coronavirus beard.
Yeah.
a lot of winemakers I've been talking to suddenly have these lockdown beards. So
I hope I'm going to move it as soon as possible. It means that.
So listen, give us a little bit of an overview of the Marchesi Antinori holdings and the various estates, because you farm all over Italy, from Puglia in the deep south all the way up to Piedmont in the north. So give us a little bit of an idea of where the different estates are under your direction.
As you know, I don't like to talk about group because we are not really a group. Mm-hmm. We are, in a certain sense, a family who owns different estates that have their personality, but also they managers. They are managed, not all together. So we try to maintain a strong identity everywhere. Of course, there is a sort of, let's say, coordination, but we consider each estate as one company in a certain sense. So mm-hmm. we have 2 estates in Puglia that are under the Taumaresca brand, one in Salento, another one in Castel del Monte, where we produce, in southern part of Puglia, we produce, of course, Rosé and Primitivo, but also Negramaro. And in the northern side, we have Chardonnay and Aglianico. I think They are both wonderful property. I think you have been there.
Yeah.
Then we have outside Tuscany, we have Pronotto in Piedmont, where we produce Barolo, Barbaresco, and I mean all the local grape varieties, Barolo, Barbaresco, Dolcetto, and Barbera. And then we have, of course, in Tuscany, in the most beautiful area and the area where there is really a lot of potential. For sure, Chianti Classico, which is, I mean, the place where we were born 630 years ago, and it remains really the main place, also in terms of dimension for us.
Here's the Chianti Classico Riserva, for example.
Riserva, we produce Chianti Classico Riserva, Marchesi Antinori, Badia Passignano, and Villa Antinori and Peppoli. Then we have Bolgheri, where we have a very old, I mean, estate, because the estate came to Antinori through Carlotta della Gherardesca, that was the Piero Antinori's mother. Then we have, of course, Montalcino, Pian delle Vigne, Montepulciano, La Bracesca.
Here we have the
red and black.
The red wine from Montalcino.
Yes, Maremma, Le Mortelle. We have also, of course, let's say my place, Castello della Sala in Umbria, where I started 40 years ago, and some other, let's say, vineyards that are instrumental for us to produce our, let's say, Villa Antinori Red. So we have a small vineyard in Sovana, in Pitigliano, which is an Etruscan area where we produce the rosé. Okay, this is the Villa Antinori, it's Tuscany GT. No, I mean, then we have also in Chile, Daras de Pirque, and California, where we have Antica, which is our, let's say, part of our, let's say, earth, in a certain sense. Antica is very special for us, for me, but also for the Antinori family, especially for Piero Antinori. I mean, we used to go there practically quite often. Now, I mean, we miss it because, I mean, we cannot travel. And there we produce, for sure, I mean, we produce Cabernet and Chardonnay, but it's a place which is really unique. So I think most of our place, most of our vineyard, most of our estate are really in a beautiful place. I think, I mean, in order to have great wine, you have to be also in a beautiful. It helps. So the best place in the world where the wines are very good, and also, I mean, wonderful in terms of, let's say, you know, landscaping and so on.
Yeah, it's funny how that works out, that some of the most beautiful wines come from the most beautiful places in the world. The aesthetic it runs through them. I guess the vines need to have a good view.
Yes.
Renzo, so as you've just explained, you have a panoramic view of not only Italian wine, but also, you know, Californian wine. So I wanted to get your thoughts a little bit on what's going to happen next. What are your thoughts for the next year as we slowly get out of this, you know, this lockdown phase, and as business comes back online and distribution starts to warm up again? What are your thoughts for the future, for the immediate future, for the next year or so for Italian wine?
No, it's difficult to predict what will happen and when. We are still there is still a lot of uncertainty in how to manage the market and how to work. But for sure, what happened really modify our way of thinking. I think we have a business model in terms of sales and marketing, which is quite old. Practically, we sell the wine as we used to do 60 years ago. So sure. I think this lockdown probably helped us to better understand or to try to change something in the future. A lot of people that they are talking about in e-commerce that was already strong in US, but it's much stronger. Even generation like mine that was not accustomed to buy things online. Now, I mean, we were obliged to do it, and probably even in the future we will remain close to this kind of approach. Restaurant will remain, in my opinion, the key to propose. I mean, to know the wine, because I mean, when you go to the restaurant, you are also prepared to drink a good glass of wine. But for sure, also families will be another point where the wine will be drank a lot. So I think we need to be probably more efficient. We need to better understand all the different channels. Also the off-trade that was considered a channel not really interesting. Now, I mean, most of the people, they buy things on the off-trade. So why you see that?
And there's a lot of opportunity to kind of change the way we see that. Yeah, I agree.
Of course, it's not a matter of being there, but the problem is to be there at the right price. So it's always a matter of price than being in a place or in another place. If the price is, it's okay, no problem. So I think we will be more efficient for sure, also as a company. I think wine is not a luxury good, it's something different, because I mean, we know that in order to produce wine, we are under the sky. We need to be closer to the soil, in my opinion, also in the way of thinking. So, you know, something will change, and for sure, some company will have some problems, because I mean, this problem of being solid, problem of financial problem, you know, it will be not easy, in my opinion. Also, most of the restaurants will not open, because I mean, I read somewhere that probably 30% of the restaurant will not open, at least maybe in a short time, but you know, so it will be quite complicated. We are still under pressure. We don't feel comfortable. We know that the virus is declining, but we are still not. We don't feel safe, and that doesn't help.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to add, if anybody has any questions, please go ahead and ask them, because I'm looking at the comments and I noticed some very enthusiastic comments, including one of our viewers who said they named their daughter Solaya. So there you go. I think that's fantastic.
I'm sure they know that wonderful as the wine is good.
So listen, I still don't see my report coming up. I've been checking online because I can't wait to share it with you as soon as it's published. But as we wait for the report to go online, so I wanted to talk specifically about a few of the wines that we've just kind of skimmed over and mentioned. And of course, probably the wine that most defines the Marchesi Antinori brand is Tignanello, a wine that has enormous importance, you know, as a watershed wine, because it changed the story of Italian wine and changed the story of wine in general. And it really put Italy on the world stage in terms of its wine culture and influence. So the wine is incredibly important. The first vintage was 1971. It was released in 1974. And I wanted to, I've reviewed the 2017 vintage, which we see right here. But I wanted to give you a chance to kind of go back in time and give us a little bit of history of what were the driving forces that brought this beautiful wine into creation. I know that the story is actually quite relevant, because Piero Antinori had seen the flood in Florence. Tuscany was going through difficult economic times in the post-war era of Italian life, and he makes a trip. He makes a trip to California, yeah, and also gets inspired by some of the work happening in California, and then comes back to Tuscany and starts to think about how he can make a great Tuscan wine. So can you give us a little bit of the background?
If you think now how it happened, it seems to be stupid in a certain sense, because in a few words, Piero decided to produce a different wine than the one that was usually produced there in Chianti Classico, where in order to produce red wine, Chianti Classico, we were obliged to use also white grapes. And so it seems strange, but that was the reality. And what Piero did was something simple, if we think now, but I mean, 50 years ago was a little bit more complex. It was, let's take the best vineyard we have, the best place we have, the best variety we have, which is Sangiovese, and let's try to produce a wine using Sangiovese. And that was the result in 71. In 71, there was not Cabernet, but it was just Sangiovese and probably few vines of Mammolo and Canaiolo, but practically 99% Sangiovese. But before 71, in 1970, was produced a wine that used to have the label you showed before, which is Chianti Classico, from Tenuta Tignanello. So the idea of producing a cru was already in Chianti Classico, but in the 1970, they realized
in fact, if you look at the, this is the Riserva, and it says at the bottom of the bottle, Tenuta Tignanello, right here.
Exactly.
And this is actually a photo of the property.
Exactly. So we realized that the wine was very good, but there was something that made the wine not as intense as we would to obtain. And this is the reason why in 71, they decided to remove the white grapes and produce a table wine. Let's use the glasses.
My article was just published. Okay.
So I didn't see. So then let me know if I have to interrupt the discussion with you, or we can go ahead as a friends.
No, I will. Okay, listen, I have it here on my other phone. So the article was just published here. You see, I have it, and let me get to the wines. So I reviewed the 17, and we're gonna talk about the 17 Tignanello as soon as we go through the little bit of the history. And hold on, it's downloading.
You need time. I mean,
so I gave it's 96 points.
Huh. Not bad.
Not bad.
Not bad. No, I.
You
are here, but I fully agree with you, because 17 was a challenging vintage, but was not a bad vintage. Was bad for the.
You did a beautiful job. In fact, I have to say, I was surprised, because I went into tasting the 17s thinking, you know, the vintage was very hot, the fruit was very ripe, and I don't like it when you get heavy fruit, sensations in the wine, that kind of jammy, and it's something that I immediately, think, oh, and the seamlessness of the wine, and the way that it just covers the palate. It's a beautiful wine. It was beautifully smooth, and the quality of the tannins is what surprised me most, because I expected a little bit more astringency and maybe a little bit of bitterness, which we've seen in some of the other wines from 17. But I think you did a very good job.
I mean, the
vintage
was, as you say, I mean, first of all, I agree on the score. I think it has not the finesse we had in 16, but considering the vintage, the 17 is a great wine.
It's a great wine, yeah. The 16 is absolutely. In fact, I noticed that somebody asked a question. What are your favorite in the last 10 years? What are your favorite, or what are the best vintages of Tignanello?
I think 16 was a great vintage. 16, 15, 10, if I can say that. But 17 is a vintage which is very particular, because, as you say, it was quite hot, but especially dry. The advantage was, in terms of quality, the advantage was that in 17 we had also a little bit of frost in the spring, in April, that reduced the crop, the yield. And so the vines were able to maintain, let's say, a good health, in a certain sense, during the growing season. And at the end, of course, we had grapes that were a little bit overripe, but not so dark. They were still a little bit, let's say, red, a little bit pungent, with a touch of acidity, with a vibrancy. So, of course, it's not 16 in terms of being more linear, more silky. You taste the dimension of 17, but not the dimension of the tannins. Tannins are really nice. I mean, the wines has a wonderful drinkability, because maintaining the character of Tignanello, but you know, that in a difficult vintage, a great place make the difference.
There was a question about the 13. What are your thoughts about the 13?
I think 13 was very good, completely different than 17. Probably, I don't say closer to 16 because 13 was a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more aggressive in a certain sense. As I say quite often, a little bit more red. But 13 is a great vintage. It's really a great vintage. So it's difficult also to say which one is the best. I think it's more a matter of style than a matter of quality, because even the score, if you give 96 or 97 or more or less if they are there, it's just more a matter of style. So if we want to describe the style, we say 13 a little bit more, let's say, as I said before, vibrant. 14 was a little bit lighter because the vintage. 15 was ripe, rich, but still quite elegant. 16 very refined, and 17 rich, darker than usual, but still with wonderful tannins. I mean, as you know, when I talk about tannins in Chianti Classico and of course at Tignanello, I say there are 3 levels of tannins. Tannins that are vibrant, tannins that are, let's say, nervous, and tannins that are hysteric. If they remain in the vibrant area, they are very good. And I think 17 as tannins is quite vibrant. It's not nervous. Maybe 13 was a little bit more nervous than 17.
I like the ones, you know, when we spoke, you mentioned about, you know, a wine having either red fruit energy or black fruit energy. And I like the way that you put that. And I think that also applies to certain vintages, of course, that, you know, I would think that 17 is definitely more of a black fruit energy vintage, of course, but you've been able to kind of hold that back and add in more of that red fruit energy, which is great. We're getting a lot of questions about different vintages and, you know, more of your favorite, but let's just go back for a second to you were telling us the kind of the beginning of Tignanello, and then we can jump forward to back to the 17.
Happened after the 1970, we realized, and Piero realized also together with Giacomo Tavis, at that time was the winemaker at Antinori, that 70 was good, but probably not deep enough, not intense enough, because the white grapes. And so they decided to remove the white grapes and have just red grapes, changing also the cask, using small barrels on the Bordeaux style in a certain sense. And Tignanello was born like this. I mean, and then they decided to sell the wine as table wine. And Piero remember always that Veronelli, that used to be a famous journalist in Italy, also a great friend, encouraged Piero to do it and to release the wine as a table wine, because he said, you know, you don't care about the appellation, try to make the best wine you can. And through Tignanello, many things have changed during the years, because then also the appellation Chianti Classico changed, not removing completely the white grape, but reducing, and then finally removing the white grapes. And now Chianti Classico, most of the Chianti Classico is produced nearly exclusively with Sangiovese, or at least with Sangiovese, which is maybe 90%, 95, or 100%, like our Badia Passignano. Even if the appellation allow the possibility to use 20% of variety non-Sangiovese, we personally think that once you use Cabernet or Merlot or Syrah or Petit Verdot, 20% is too much. Even if the rule allowed to do it, I think using 20%, you produce a different wine. And Tignanello is a different wine than Chianti Classico. Of course, as the soul of Chianti Classico, but 20% of Cabernet modifies a little bit the style of Sangiovese.
Now, there's a question that it's been repeated a couple of times. What are the differences between Tignanello and Solaia? Because they're made in the same
state. They are contiguous as a vineyard. Solaia, the Cabernet of Solaia used to be part of the blend of Tignanello. When Solaia was born in 1978, because the production of Cabernet from the vineyard of Tignanello was a little bit too much, and they decided not to use all the Cabernet, but they bought a little bit of Cabernet just to see what happened with the evolution of the wine, and Solaya was born like this. The first vintage was 78, even if we released the first vintage at 79, we released the 78 later, in middle of 80s, more or less. And Solaya is practically the opposite of Tignanello. Tignanello is 80% Sangiovese and 20% of Cabernet, of which 5%, at least depending on the vintage, is Franc. And Solaya is 20% Sangiovese and 80% Cabernet, where Franc is between 5 to 7%, depends on the vintage. For instance, in 2008 and 19, as we had this really new, as we had a very long growing season, and Cabernet Sauvignon didn't really came very ripe, we decided to use a little bit of Cabernet Franc in 19. So we will see how the wine will be.
There's a question. What vintages were skipped of Tignanello?
I mean, we skipped the 72, 73, 74, 76, 81, 84, 92, 2002.
Oh, wow. Somebody also writes that the Solaya 2015 is one of the best wines, 100 points across the board. There was also a question if your brother helps out at all at Antinori in any capacity. Now, your brother is a very famous enologist as well, Renzo Cotarella, who consults with many, many very important and fabulous estates across Italy. He's done a lot of work to bring the quality of wine from southern Italy up, and you know, he's maybe he's even more important than you. I don't know, in the wine world, but but so the question was, if has he ever had any role at Antinori?
No. I think one Cotarella is enough in Antinori.
And another question that we had a little bit.
Energy.
Another question that we had before was, what are you doing about counterfeit bottles, or how do you fight the problem of counterfeit bottles?
You know, with Tignanello, we have used, we have the embossing. I mean, at the bottle here. First of all, we did the embossing using this one.
Right.
And then that was in with the 13 vintage. Then we had Tignanello on the bottom. So there is Tignanello here.
Right.
Exactly. And starting from last year, we use also this one, the stripe.
Right.
In order to realize, I mean, you can control and you can see if the bottle is original. It is quite complicated, but we try to make their job more and more difficult.
Yeah, of course. All right. So moving a little bit away from Chianti Classico, another wine that I wanted to talk about is another one that I absolutely love. It's another wine that the Guadaltasso from Bolgheri, another estate, which is maybe about a 4-hour drive from the Chianti area on the coast of Tuscany in the region of Bolgheri. And this is another wine. This is more of this shows a different philosophy completely, because Tignanello is, you know, it speaks very much of a territory. It's a wine that has enormous classic lines, but this, you know, the Guadaltasso is a bit flashier. It's more international. It represents a bit of a different style. So could you tell us a little bit about the Guadaltasso project?
We are, as you say, in another place, completely different. We are close to the ocean. And sometimes, especially for American consumer or American producer, they don't have clear what happened close to the ocean, because, I mean, they are accustomed to the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
And the Pacific Ocean, once you are close to the Pacific Ocean, you are in a cooler region. In our case, being close to the Mediterranean Ocean, which is a warm ocean, a warm sea, we are in a region which is a little bit warmer than central Tuscany. Of course, with a climate which is less continental, which means, I mean, you have a high temperature during the spring because the ocean, but more mitigation during the summer because the ocean. And at the end, varieties like Cabernet, Merlot, Syrah, Cabernet Franc, they really perform very well in Bolgheri, especially Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, but also Merlot, depends on the soil, of course. Bolgheri is quite recent as an area because probably, I mean, the first wine produced there was Sassicaia in the middle of 60s. But then, I mean, also other producers started to make great wine, Ornellaia, and we started with Guadaltasso in 1990. That was the first vintage. Of course, as you say, we are in a completely different tasting, let's say, approach, because Cabernet, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc, they are all related, all oriented to black fruit. So more blueberry, all raspberry, all really black and ripe. And no, different pH, because as Tignanello and Chianti Classico are vibrant, slightly acidic. In Bolgheri, we are in a condition where pH is much higher. The wine is more, let's say, supple, sometimes jammy, but not really overripe. Because, I mean, temperatures are mitigated by the sea. And so you don't have an overripe grapes, very rarely. I mean, it could happen more in Chianti Classico to have overripe grapes than because the ocean. And there, of course, the quality and the style is completely different. Maybe as a wine, we can say, we can use a word, maybe it's wrong, but more, let's say, more modern in a certain sense, considering the environment where the wine is produced and the style of the wine. Of course, we are talking about all the, let's say, Bordeaux variety, even if also Syrah comes quite well in Bolgheri because the soil and the climate. So it's a sort of Bordeaux Hermitage, let's say. And
so Renzo, I have here's my score of the Guadaltasso, 97.
You are on the right. You are on the right direction, I must say.
Thank you.
No, but it makes sense. I think Tignanello 17 is very good. I think probably it was much more difficult to produce this style of Tignanello than to produce this style of Guadaltasso because the varieties and because the climate. But Guadaltasso is really a great vintage, the 17. Great vintage because, again, it has the intensity, it has the power, but it is not, how you say, heavy. It has a wonderful drinkability, a wonderful fruit. It is not jammy. So I really like very much. And probably 2017, Guadaltasso will evolve beautifully together with Tignanello. So probably in 5 or 6 or 7 years, these two wines, they will be really fantastic because they need a little bit of time to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
Because even if the tannins are silky, they need some time to relax.
The Guadaltasso also, it has, again, this kind of seamless quality. You've changed, some of the little percentages in the blend and, really, fine-tuned it for the vintage and the work really shows because, again, in the mouthfeel, it just is smooth, it's rich, it's lasting, it's a beautiful wine.
Yeah, so we had to reduce a little bit Merlot because being the season quite warm, Merlot was a little bit overripe and over-alcoholic, and the season was fantastic for Cabernet Sauvignon. So, I mean, the use of the blend is useful also because we are able to, to adapt the blend also to the vintage and maintain a certain style. So where you have very cold vintage, you have more Merlot. When you have very hot vintage, you have more Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, in 2014 was the opposite.
There's a question. So what would be your 2 favorite vintages of Guadaltasso for the last 2 decades?
2007, because 2007 was the first vintage where we removed Syrah, introducing Cabernet Franc, and I think 2007 had a touch of elegance, of finesse, that we didn't have before, and probably 2016. I would add maybe a third one, which is a little bit controversial, but I like very much, with 2010. 2010 was a really quite a complex vintage because we had some rain at the end of September and Cabernet Sauvignon was not overripe. All right, but I mean the wine is really, really refined, so I like very much. But maybe 17, in my opinion, in 16. 16 is
2010 is regarded as a classic vintage across Tuscany, but on the coast it was a more difficult vintage, if I remember correctly. It wasn't, it gave more problems, but rain at the wrong time and whatnot, so a little bit more challenging.
Yes, we had rain. I don't remember exactly if it was September 28 or September 29, but it was the last day of the vintage, of the harvest. And I mean, the best Cabernet were affected a little bit about the rain.
So what are some of the bottles of wine that have kind of changed your own professional course or that have greatly influenced you? A few of the bottles that have, moved you and have created a new way of working for you or have inspired you?
Many, I must say, many. And still, I like to taste many. I mean, I can consider, maybe I have three wines that really changed my idea about wine. One was from Bordeaux, it was Latour 61. Another one from Burgundy, that was Latache 78. And another one was a Corton Charlemagne. I don't remember the producer, but I remember the vintage, 71. That was the wine I thought it couldn't exist. And from this wine, I started to think about Cervaro. But there are many wines I like. Petrus 2000 is a great wine. I tasted a few times. Romanée Conti 2005 is a great wine. I think, and also I like also a lot of champagne. I think to produce a great wine, you have to develop the ability of understanding nuances. And in order to understand nuances, you have to taste wines that are difficult. Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, but even Champagne, where you have to be really, really very careful. You have to be very concentrated in order to understand each single detail. I think in order to improve the quality, you have to build your palate in order to be sensitive to details. And for me and for us, I think one of the, at least on red wines, we really like wines with really a wonderful level of tannins. I think to make a red wine means, in a few words, to manage tannins.
To manage tannins.
This is the secret, in my opinion, during the growing season, during vinification and maturation, and then during aging, because also the barrels, they make really the difference. Because this is another point that sometimes is not considered, or we consider, French oak is French oak, but barrels really could help or could create really a problem.
Can you go into more detail? I mean, I know that you have played around with using maybe barrels from Bordeaux and then Burgundy, depending on the vintage. So can you get into a little bit what the school of tannic management, exactly what does that consist of?
Considering that you have a regular vintage, let's leave aside the grapes. Consider we have a great vintage and we pick the grapes at the right moment. Pick the grapes at the right moment means to taste the grapes, of course, to go in the vineyard, to taste the grapes, but most of all, to know the place. Because you cannot say, in each place, the right moment is different than another. And in each variety, of course, there is a difference. But then, you have vinification where you have many variables. You can crush 100%, you cannot crush 100%. You can do, you can ferment at 30 degrees centigrade, or you can ferment at 27 degrees centigrade. You can do the cold soak, you cannot do the cold soak. You can do the pumping over or the punching down on the rack retard. So there are many different aspects during vinification and maturation that really are able to modify the final structure of the tannins. And also to taste the wine in this condition is quite complicated, because usually you taste the wine when you have also sugar. And to test tannin with sugar is not easy. So you have to be accustomed. But first of all, again, you need to know the place. You need to be in harmony with the place.
Right.
You must have a lot of experience. Of course, to have an old vineyard is better than have a young vineyard. Young vines are a little bit more aesthetic than old vines that are more quiet. Also because, I mean, you have roots that are very deep. And so even if you have a small modification in the climate, vines, they react in a different way. And then you have, of course, malolactic and barrel aging. Barrels are really, in my opinion, are very critical. And the barrel we use, Tignanello, are different than the barrel we use in Bolgheri. But the barrel we have used in 1917 are different than the one we have used in 16. Now, I mean, we prefer to buy barrels, or most of the barrels, after the harvest. You know, quite often you are obliged, I mean, the barrel cooper, they prefer you order the barrel in advance in order, you know, to have a plan, much more easy. But we were able to convince our supplier to prepare the barrel according to the vintage. We usually, in the red wine, we do the malolactic fermentation in 1-year-old barrel, and according to the vintage, according to the experience, we use different barrels depending on the tannins or the fruit, all these things. And I think that makes the difference. We learned a lot about that.
There's a question about the 2018 vintage in Bolgheri. What can we expect?
2018 in Bolgheri, in my opinion, was good, but not as good as the best vintages. I think in 2018, Bolgheri, we had a little bit more rain than usual, and wines are intense, but not as intense as you can expect from Bolgheri. This is my opinion. Maybe they are a little bit more refined, but they are less dark, less deep. Good, because in any case, I mean, the 3 varieties, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, you can manage. But in 18, for instance, Merlot was much more important than Cabernet for the reason I said before about 17. 19 as a vintage, in my opinion, was much better than 18. 19 in Bolgheri was a great vintage because, again, the 19 was a very long growing season because May was very cold, as I said before. But in Bolgheri, all these varieties were able to reach the ripeness easily, much more easily than Chianti Classico, where it was cooler.
So there are 2 more questions also on the theme of Bolgheri. One of our listeners has admired the attention to detail at the Guadaltasso estate, the farming, the vineyards, and wants to know a little bit more about how you maintain that, and and what the protocol is for keeping such a beautiful property. And we also have somebody else asking if you had to choose between Tignanello and Guadaltasso, which one do you personally prefer, and also to what vintages?
I try to answer to the second one, say when you have 2 children, there is no one you prefer.
Diplomatic answer. And then if you put Solaya in there, then
There are moments where you prefer a wine and moments where you prefer another one. I think Tignanello, in any case, represents our history. Is let's say, the first child. No, is the one you really pay a lot of attention as you do with the first child. And it has this, as I said, vibrancy, this character, this uniqueness that makes Tignanello really a wine that is too close to your heart to say, I prefer another wine. Guadaltasso is, in a certain sense, I should be more close to Guadaltasso because we started producing with 90. Guadaltasso, and I was immediately involved in producing Guadaltasso. So in a certain sense, I should feel Guadaltasso more mine than Tignanello. Not like this. I mean, I love Guadaltasso for the reason I said, but there are two wines different, and the question is, do you prefer, you know, as I say, a daughter or a son? You know, I cannot really, not because I want to be diplomatic, but with my heart, I prefer Tignanello. Probably with my mind, I prefer Guadaltasso, but depends on the vintage. The first question was about
the attention to detail at Guadaltasso. It's true. It's a beautiful. As soon as you drive in through the gates, everything is just like going into a fantasy land. It's a beautiful property, and that applies to all of your properties, because I've seen pretty much all of them, and it is. Exactly. How many people are employed at the various sites?
In Guadaltasso. In Guadaltasso, I mean, considering the work, we are at least 70. So we are 70 people. Then we have some seasonal workers, and depending on the season, the harvest is one, but also the canopy management sometimes require a little bit more people in a short time, and so we are obliged to hire some other people to do the lateral removal that we have to do very quickly, to do the, let's say, the shot selection, also to do the cluster selection, because sometimes we have to remove some cluster from the weakest shoots. So, I mean, attention to detail is something which is, I don't say difficult to explain, but there are many details. Of course, in my opinion, the best approach you can have is to have vineyards that are balanced. They have to be in balance. I think vineyard is like people. They produce very well when they are in a good condition, when they are in balance, when they are able to think, when they are able to not to be under stress. Some people say, you know, the vines, in order to produce great grape, they have to be under stress. No, I think it's really stupid. Is able to produce well under stress. People and vines, they produce well when they are close to be stressed, but not stressed. And
almost stressed, right?
Close to be stressed, but not stressed. You have to be there, but I mean, in order to really have all in balance, in my opinion, vines have not to be too stressed. And so you have to adapt what you want to do in the vineyard, what you need to do in the vineyard to the season. There is not a rule. The rule is following the season. This is the rule. So there are seasons where you have to remove lateral. There are seasons where you have not to remove all the lateral. There are seasons where you have to remove some leaves, and there are other where you remove more leaves. There are seasons where you have to remove the leaves in both sides, and there are seasons where you have to remove just in one side, because maybe on the west side it's too much. There are seasons where you can produce, let's say, 3 tons to the acre, and seasons where you have to produce 2 tons to the acre. There are varieties that have to be managed in a way, and varieties that have to be managed in another way. There are varieties you have to grow and you have to manage using the, you know, the cane prune system, and there are other where it is much better to have the cordon spur prune system. So there is not a rule. Luckily, there is not a rule. I think the best way of managing vineyard is to spend time in the vineyard. You know, we are a little bit too, how you say, fissati. We pay a lot of attention on that.
Fixated, yeah.
Yes, but I think if you want to really obtain the best from your vineyard, you have to spend time there. You have to understand where you are. You have to see the vines. You have to talk with them. I mean, there were people 50, 60, 70, 100 years ago that didn't know anything about the physiology of the vines, but they were able to understand what they need to do in the vineyard in order to obtain great grapes. And the only way to do it is to spend time in the vineyard. This is my opinion. To have your hands be dirty.
we have questions regarding two more wines. The questions were a little bit of a while ago, but somebody asked a little bit about the Bruciato, to talk about the Bruciato and where it falls in the program for Guadaltasso. And we also had a question to talk a little bit about the territory of Montalcino, and maybe your project there.
Yes. Bruciato, as you know, I mean, we started producing Bruciato with the 2002 vintage. 2002 was quite, let's say, challenging as a vintage, and we decided to produce Guadaltasso and to release practically that Guadaltasso under the Bruciato name. That was the first vintage, and it was immediately a great success. Also because the wine is really very good.
This is one of the most popular wines. I mean, every time I go to Bulgaria, I see it everywhere. I see everybody drinking it. I mean, it has a huge following, Bruciato.
Yes, you are right. But you know why? Because I think Bruciato is a perfect wine to drink. Because it's a wine that has let's say, the soul of the place. For sure, is a wine from Bulgaria. It's a wine which has a wonderful tannins, a wonderful drinkability, nice fruit. But it is not a simple wine. It's an easy wine to drink, but it is not a simple wine. And that's the reason why it's so successful. And of course, we have some problem in some vintages because we don't have enough, but we want to maintain a certain level of quality because in order to be successful, you must have the quality. So Bruciato for us is, we want to show through Bruciato the attention we can also give to a wine which is not so expensive. Because, I mean, to pay attention to something is a matter of culture. You cannot, pay attention just to Solaya because that's the most expensive. But I think in each wine you want to produce has to be based on a project. There are vineyards that are able to produce Tignanello and vineyards that cannot produce Tignanello. So you have to produce grapes for Pepoli, grapes for Vinatore Riserva, grapes for another wine. So from each single variety, depending on where you are and how you manage them, you obtain different wines. So I think it's important to know the place where you work, the vineyard, the variety, in order to address the production according to the style of the wine you want to produce. And in my opinion, this is not a secret. For a vineyard manager or for a winemaker, is something which is given for granted in a certain sense.
And also, don't forget about Montalcino.
Sorry. So Montalcino, we started producing our Brunello in 1995. That was our first vintage. We are in a place where, which is considered quite warm, because we are in the southern side of Brunello area, and for sure for us, vintage that are very, are very warm and more complicated than the ones that are, let's say, cooler. We have tried to manage the vineyard properly by, let's say, making the vineyard in a certain sense cooler, which means, in a few words, to move the cordon and the training system a little bit up in order to have more ventilation, to have a little bit more canopy in order to have more, let's say, less exposure direct to the sun. We have tried also to make, to have more, let's say, to shade a little bit the cluster in order to reduce the temperature at the cluster level. We have chosen also some clones that are a little bit, that are able to ripe a little bit later. But, just recently, we just bought a piece of land in one of the upper side of Montalcino, 620 meters. That means more or less 2,000 feet, where we are going to plant some vines, because I think we need to have also an experience on the cool side of Montalcino, and we will do it. Probably the first one we will release will be in 2030. So I'm not sure I'll be here, but I hope so.
Well, I was just about to ask, why not buy more vineyards in Montalcino if you're looking for a cooler spot? So they haven't, it hasn't been planted yet.
No, no, we just bought the land and we are going to plant it. But you know, I think
where is it exactly? Where in the appellation is it located?
It's in Brunello di Montalcino. It's
no, but where in the
practically on the Passo del Lume Spento.
Okay, so the highest part, that's the absolute highest part of the appellation, the highest point.
Yeah.
Renzo, we're getting close to an hour together, but there was a question at the beginning that somebody asked about you. When did you start making wine, and how did you end up where you are?
You know, I mean, as you know, my family have been making wine since, last generation. And so I had a problem, a big problem when I was young. I was 18. My father died. And so I decided, before going to the university, I had my brother, Riccardo, during harvest. And that was 73. And so I realized that was, something exciting. Even if I must say I've been always more excited spending time in the vineyard. But I realized that if we want to produce great grapes or great wine, we need to know both vineyard and wine. So I was obliged to become winemaker in order to try to produce the best grape for the best wine, or at least for the certain style of wine. And I had the chance, and I was so lucky to meet Piero Antinori in '77. I was not graduated yet. We met because he was president of the local, the Oviedo Vineyard Association. And starting from there, after a couple of years, I went to Castello della Sala, and you know, Piero was so crazy to give me all credit. And, but I was very lucky. I think what I can say, but not because, I can say something like this because I really feel I have to say, I think to work with a family like Antinori was really a great fortune for me, because I had the possibility to make mistakes. I had the possibility to try anything I wanted to try. I had the possibility to go around the world and do the experience, also to work, because it's not a matter of visiting an area. Because you visit an area, you don't understand anything. You understand what people told you, but you really didn't understand, the reality of the area. So I had the possibility to work in Chile. I had the possibility to work in Napa Valley. I had the possibility to work in Washington State, in Piedmont, in Franciacorta, in Puglia, and that in Montalcino, in Montepulciano, in Bolgheri, in Chianti Classico, and I think for me it was a great fortune and a great experience, still is, and very exciting. Still is exciting, very exciting also. So I consider myself very lucky, also because my family supported me to do what I'm doing.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's a great honor for me to be able to taste the wines that you make, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I was so happy to taste these last releases, and I think that when you after this, when you have a chance to read my reviews, you'll see my enthusiasm. It really.
Check.
Renzo, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and and it was great to talk to you.
Monica, thank you very much. Thank you to Wine Advocate for the possibility to explain or to talk about our wines. It's always a pleasure to do it, and I love to do it. I think we spend a lot of time in the vineyard and the wine, and there is a satisfaction to talk about them, especially with people like you and with people that follow us. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank
you, and let's keep our fingers, our fingers crossed for a good harvest coming up, a good summer. And let's hope that we can get out of this situation soon to get back to normal.
Yeah, yes, we hope as soon as possible.
With a chin of Tignanello.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Renzo. Ciao. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Ciao. Che devo fare qui? Non ho idea.